Hello class, welcome back to science. This is unit 6. We're going to be spending the last little bit of this year talking about evolution. This is the last of the Kansas State science standards that we haven't addressed yet in biology. This is not going to be a debate or trying to do comparisons between theories of evolution versus creationism or anything like that. We're just going to talk about the scientific theories behind evolution. Your notes were already passed out. You should already have the complete packet. I will also be posting things like this PowerPoint online, and I did this screencast just in case it helps you guys to hear me talk through the notes as well as just reading the highlight version, I guess. I know this is a very new and inconvenient way to try and learn science, but we're working with what we got, and so this is how we're going to do it. This is still very experimental. If something's not working for you in particular, if you'd rather arrange for a different type of communication, please just let me know and I'd be happy to make adjustments. But anyway, let's get started. 6.1 is just sort of the introduction. We're going to be talking about sort of the history of evolution. How did this theory develop? Who were the main characters? What was going on? So, first, a definition. Evolution is change in a species over time. The idea that species change isn't really a new thing. We're familiar with that concept, even just looking at things like our own pet dogs. We've got a ton of different varieties of dogs. We know that if we control their breeding, we can change them. We can make Chihuahuas smaller or Great Danes bigger, stuff like that. And so this change is not really a debatable issue. We know species change over time. The theory behind evolution is trying to pull it all together. Why are species changing and how are they changing? And what are we trying to explain by learning about how species change? Specifically, we're trying to explain species diversity, how many different species there are, why each island, for example, could end up with entirely different species compared to the species on the mainland, why there were widespread species of dinosaurs, but now we have species of mammals, stuff like that. We're also trying to explain those fossils because we can see there's a lot of species that used to exist in the past that don't exist anymore, and we have to be able to explain how we can lose species diversity in large, mass extinction events like meteorite impacts or sudden climate change, and then still regain species diversity after all the damage is done. Things do slowly recover. And then finally, the last part is just stating that all living things are related to one another, that all living things have a common ancestor. If you go back far enough, there was one cell in the primordial sludge that gave rise to trees and mushrooms and bacteria and dogs and cats and us. And this explains a lot of the similarities that we see in things like our DNA, or in our cellular structures, or in our bones. If you look at the way that our arm bones are arranged, with one upper arm bone and two bones in your forearm, most mammals have that same arrangement, even birds do. And so, when we're trying to explain all these different sort of things with one theory. Okay. Whoops. There we go. So, for this we need to define species pretty thoroughly. Species are actually a little bit fuzzy term. It's not just based on all animals that look more or less the same. They have to have similar characteristics and be able to reproduce together and have offspring that can go on and have offspring of their own. They can't be like a dead end of making babies and then those babies not being able to have babies of their own. For example, like horses and donkeys. A horse plus a horse gives you another horse, and a donkey plus a donkey gives you another donkey. But a horse plus a donkey gives you a mule. And if you have two mules, well, you can't make more mules. Mules plus mules equals nothing. They don't reproduce together. Mules are sterile. And so mules, even though they're unique and often they're very similar to one another, and you can have a whole herd of mules, they're not considered their own species because that herd would go extinct after one generation because mules can't make more mules. And horses and donkeys are not considered the same species, even though they can have those babies together and make mules. Because, again, mules don't make more mules. Okay, so how did this idea develop? Looking way back historically, we started recognizing that there were lots of different animals, probably in prehistoric times, but the first person to know all these different species and try and see how, and to write at least, about how species might change over time was Aristotle. This is actually pre-Christian, so it's not related to any particular religion, but the idea here was that what we see is what we have. That these species around us are eternal, they're unchanging, that they're just going to be the same for forever. And because this matched our daily observations, you don't see dogs changing very much over, a single human lifetime. It was widely accepted all across the world, thousands and thousands of years, The idea that the species that exist now are the species that have always existed and the species that will always exist. There are some problems though, because when we look at the wider picture, we can see large trends. We can see that dogs, I keep coming back to dogs because we're all really familiar with dogs, but we can see what we've done to dogs. So we've taken dogs and we've bred dogs to be sheep herders that are big and protective and have lots of fur. And then we've also bred dogs to be companion animals that are small and maybe, more bonding to humans and defensive of their homes and territorial. We've bred dogs to be fighters. We've bred dogs to be guardians. I mean, we've done a lot of different things to dogs to the point where different breeds of dogs are very, very different from one another. And if we can do that as humans, with our short lifespans and our lack of knowledge of the genetics behind dogs, because most of this existed long before we knew what genetics was, then why can't it just happen naturally? Why can't the environment do this? And also, what about fossils? If species can go extinct, but we can never get new species, that means that the total number of species can only ever go down. And that would be very, very bad, because that would mean that we're always losing species diversity, we're never gaining it, and that would eventually result in the end of life on Earth, because it would just be a straight path downwards over some time frame. So we have to have some way to regain species as well as losing species, because we know that the losing species part definitely happens. Okay, so some pictures. Just to be really, really clear, humans and dinosaurs did not live together, ever. Dinosaurs have been gone for 65 million years. Anatomically modern humans are about 200,000 years old. And so, yeah, no, there are no cavemen who are hunting dinosaurs. But this is sort of a good example of natural selection. Whether or not you're going to survive or not will help determine which organisms go on to create babies and make the next generation. And then dinosaurs, everybody loves dinosaurs. Okay, so it took literally centuries before people tried to come up with a different theory. And the first person to develop that was Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck. He proposed Lamarckian evolution in 1809. As you might expect from that name, he was a French scientist. And what he found was that he realized, and this should have been pretty obvious, maybe it was to everybody, but they didn't put it into a theory, was that offspring resemble their parents. And he thought that that meant that what happened to parents could influence their offspring. That if you had a rough life and got a lot of scars, then you might have a baby with a lot of scars. Or if you worked out a lot and got really strong, you'd have babies that were born strong. This is called the inheritance of acquired characteristics. They're acquired in that they're things that they've gained from their lives. They weren't born with these characteristics, but they have them now, and he thought those things could be passed on. There was a lot of thought back then that things that happened during pregnancy and stuff like that could also cause birth defects, which we know is kind of true with chemicals, but not necessarily true with things like being scared by a sheep giving you a fuzzy baby or something like that. So that was the idea here, inheritance of acquired characteristics. Fortunately, this is very easy one to test. Let's say you have mice, like a big container of mice, and you go ahead and lop all their tails off. So now you have mice with no tails. If those mice go on and have babies, the baby mice still have tails. And so that taillessness is never actually passed on to the babies. It doesn't matter what happened to the mice as adults. It doesn't change their genetics now, which we know, but Lamarck had no idea about genetics. And so the babies themselves still don't have tails. We've actually done this with sheep for thousands of years. If you've ever seen lambs, lambs have long dangly tails. And it's a problem because they get poop in them, and then they get maggots, and then the lambs get sick. And so we've been docking tails of sheep to give them those short little stubby tails that we all think of as adult sheep as not having tails, really. But lambs are still born with long tails for centuries, thousands of years probably, since we've domesticated sheep probably. It's never changed their DNA, and so they're still born with the same long tails that their DNA codes for. Here's another example with Doberman Pinschers. These are guard dogs. They're bred to be intimidating, and they're used to defend property and stuff like that. And what we often do, we surgically alter them to make them look scarier, which sounds terrible, but it's a thing that we do. And so the one here on the right is a Doberman Pinscher that's had its tail cropped, so it's nice, it's short, and its ears docked, which give them that straight up pointy configuration. They trim the edges and actually tape cardboard in so that the scars heal into nice straight lines. On the left, that's what a Doberman Pinscher would look like if they weren't surgically altered. And yeah, they look like much friendlier dogs. And if you want your Doberman pinschers to be very scary looking, you have to do those surgical changes with every generation. They're never born with a docked tail and cropped ears. Okay, that brings us to the most famous one, Darwin. Darwinian evolution actually came close by after Lamarckian, just 50 years later in 1859. Charles Darwin was a naturalist on board the HMS Beagle. His job was to travel around and look at plants and animals. And when he did that, he took prolific notes, just tons and tons of notes. The guy loved to write. He also collected thousands and thousands of samples. And what he saw as they traveled around the world from island to island, he saw that there would be more or less the same species on the islands within the same chain, but very slight variations. For example, there's finches on the Galapagos Islands, and one island might have finches with like broad beaks, and the next island might have finches with like shorter, skinnier beaks, and the next island might have big, fat ground finches, and the next island might have more like little, tiny, fast-moving finches. But they're all finches. They're all very similar to one another. And so he developed what's now called the theory of natural selection to explain why these changes occurred. There must have been just one finch species that went to all those islands, maybe blown by storms or something, and then the conditions of the islands, what kind of food was available, what kind of predators were on the island, all those sorts of things led to changes in the finches to make them best fit their new island homes. And so over time, each island got its own distinct type of finch. So natural selection. The theory here is that organisms compete to survive and that only the best competitors live and reproduce. This does not necessarily mean that they're going to be the biggest and the strongest ones, because sometimes being big and strong isn't the best solution. Sometimes being small and sneaky works better than being big and strong. It depends exactly what your environment is. Things that might help you 100 years ago, if your environment changes, might not be the best fit anymore, and so species can change as their environments change. It's not about what you want to have. I'm sure beavers would love to have chainsaws, but just thinking and wanting it is not enough. Natural selection is about survival. The changes that occur have to be life or death. It's not just about aesthetics. Now, we've done that with our animals, and I guess sexual selection to some extent, but we pick animals to have puppies based on whether or not we think they're cute, but in nature, it's all about survival. What best helps you find food, avoid predators, find water, survive the winter, whatever it takes. We're going to talk more about natural selection. That's going to get its own day of notes. And then from there, we're going to talk more about different patterns we see in evolution and evolution over time. But this is it for today. Thank you very much for your time. Don't forget to do the worksheet. You can use your notes, the packet or the posted document or this PowerPoint while you work on your worksheet, and I really urge you to do so. And I will see you again, or talk to you again at least, on Thursday. Thank you. Bye.